Today is Saturday, July 23rd, 2016, and I'd like to look at something that's been very close to my heart, since I first read The Three Pillars of Zen back in 1968 or so, which was the ox herding pictures. I think they're one of the most profound and creative ways of expressing what the entire path of spiritual practice and realization is about. Gosh, it got really nice and cave-like in here just now, didn't it? Well, if you can stay awake even in the darkness, we'll be fine. So, the ox herding pictures, if you don't know them, we'll look at them today. If you do, I hope it'll be a good reconnection for you. They're a very creative and very Zen-like expression of the entire path of awakening practice. They come from the Sung dynasty of China, which is the same period that brought us the Wumen Quan, the Hekigan-roku, the Book of Serenity. In other words, the most central koan collections of our curriculum. And the ox herding pictures arise from the exact same period, Sung dynasty China, which is about 900 to mid-1200s. Late 900, because the Tang was in there. The Song ended with the invasion of Kublai Khan and the Mongols, which created their own dynasty, which I think was the Yuan, under Kublai Khan, who welcomed all kinds of religious expression under his rule, but it ended the Song. And in fact, many Zen teachers, Chinese Zen teachers, or some, ended up going to Japan because of the invasion of the Mongols. So history is a funny unfolding of how things get to where they are today. In any case, I'd like to begin by reading the ox herding pictures in the Three Pillars of Zen, which is where I first encountered them back, as I said, about 1968. Rose and I were living in Toronto. I was a graduate student in English literature, mythopoeic literary criticism at the University of Toronto at that time. And we had a friend, someone we met. It was a large expatriate community in Toronto at the time because of the Vietnam War. A guy we met, his first name, I think I've mentioned him to you before, was Bernie. I don't think it was Bernie Sanders, but he was Bernie. He was from New York, and he had been living at Millbrook with Timothy Leary, and became a friend of ours. He was a very, very nice guy, and unlike many of us at the time, did not have long hair, but a very 1950s, very neat haircut, in part because he had a court case coming up and needed to look like an ordinary soul. In any case, one day he said to us, "Hey, this book, I just found this book, or it just came out, Three Pillars of Zen. I think that's the path for you and Rose. I think you should read it." Funny how life takes twists and turns. We did read it. We loved it. We both began doing Zazen, sitting in our little Toronto garret apartment immediately. It was 1968. And in there were the ox herding pictures. So I actually have one of the old hardcovers of the Three Pillars of Zen. And I'd like to start by reading to you from that. So this is the 10 ox herding pictures with commentary and verses. This is Roshi Kapleau's introduction. Among the various formulations of the levels of realization in Zen, none is more widely known than the ox herding pictures, a sequence of 10 illustrations annotated with comments in prose and verse. It is probably because of the sacred nature of the ox in ancient India that this animal came to be used to symbolize man's primal nature, or Buddha mind. The original drawings and commentary that accompanies them are both attributed to Kokuan Shian, it's Japanese for Kuo-on Shi Huan, a Chinese Zen master of the 12th century, but he was not the first to illustrate the developing stages of Zen realization through pictures. Earlier versions of 5 and 8, and also 6, which Roshi Kapleau doesn't mention, Pictures exist in which the ox becomes progressively whiter. Starts off as a black ox, the last painting being a circle, an enso. This implied that the realization of oneness, the effacement of every conception of self and other, was the ultimate goal of Zen. But Kokoan, feeling this to be incomplete, added two more pictures beyond the circle to make it clear that the Zen person of the highest spiritual development lives in the mundane world of form and diversity and mingles with the utmost freedom among ordinary people whom he inspires with his compassion and radiance to walk in the way of the Buddha. It is this version that gained the widest acceptance in Japan and has proved itself over the years to be a source of instruction and unfailing inspiration to Zen students, and is presented here with modern ink and brush paintings. The painter for this one was Gyokusai Jikihara. It's Japanese, obviously. So let's start with the traditional presentations for each picture. I'll try and show you pictures as well as we go. And the verse, traditional verse that goes with it. And you'll see how wonderful, how creative, how lively these really are. So, 1, seeking the ox. The ox has never really gone astray. So why search for it? That's a good question. The ox has never really gone astray. So why search for it? Well, we all have some sense that if we don't, we'll be missing something deeply important about this very life, our own life. Having turned his back on his true nature, the man, the person, cannot see it. Because of his defilements, he has lost sight of the ox. Suddenly he finds himself confronted by a maze of crisscrossing roads, greed for worldly gain, and dread of loss spring up like searing flames. Ideas of right and wrong dart out like daggers. This was 12th century China. And yet, we look at our culture today, and it's hard to avoid these days looking at our culture. How can this not strike home? Greed for gain, dread of loss spring up like searing flames. Ideas of right and wrong dart out like daggers. But don't get him wrong here. He's not saying there is no right and wrong. Anyway, the verse is wonderful and goes like this. Desolate through forests and fearful in jungles, he is seeking an ox, which he does not find. And sorry that this is couched in gender-based language, so please reinterpret he and she, really relative. One can be supplied for the other. Desolate through forests and fearful in jungles, she is seeking an ox, which she does not find. Up and down dark, nameless, wide flowing rivers, in deep mountain thickets, he treads many bypaths. Bone tired, heart weary, he carries on his search for this something which he yet cannot find. At evening he hears cicadas chirping in the trees. Isn't that a great verse? I'm going to not comment on them in too much detail at this point. Just let them sink in. What a great verse. How expressive of our situation. Seeking an ox, we can't find it. Bone tired, heart weary. This reminds me of so many nights of sesshin in my own life. Carrying on a search for something I could not yet find. And then at evening, you're completely exhausted. You hear the cicadas chirping in the trees. 2. Let's see, by the way. Well, I don't know if you can see this, but I'll swivel around. This is 1. Seeking the ox. By the way, Rose and I used to have a bookstore called the Ox Cart. And our bookmark, sometimes may find one of those and some old book on your shelf, was of the third ox herding picture, as you'll see it. Seeing the ox, finding traces, that is, of the ox, first glimpse. Anyway, finding the tracks. Through the sutras and teachings, which includes teishos, he discerns the tracks of the ox. He has been informed that just as different shaped golden vessels are all basically of the same gold, so each and everything is a manifestation of the self. But she's unable to distinguish good from evil, truth from falsity. She's not actually entered the gate, but sees in a tentative way the tracks of the ox. Another verse. Innumerable footprints has he seen in the forest, along the water's edge. Over yonder, does he see the trampled grass? Even the deepest gorges of the topmost mountains can't hide this ox's nose, which reaches right to heaven. It's right in front of us all the time. Why don't we see it? This is what our practice helps us work on. Right here, all the time. Why don't we see it? How can we see it? 3. First glimpse of the ox. If she will but listen intently to everyday sounds, she will come to realization, and at that instant see the very source. The 6 senses are no different from this true source. In every activity, the source is manifestly present. It is analogous to the salt in water or the binder in paint. When the inner vision is properly focused, one comes to realize that that which is seen is identical with the true source. Another verse. A nightingale warbles on a twig. The sun shines on undulating willows. There stands the ox. Where could he hide? That splendid head, those stately horns, what artist could portray them? Let's look at a note here. To take the analogy Roshi Kapleau writes of form and emptiness, the salt corresponds to emptiness and the water to form. Until one has known the taste of, he says, satori, which is pretty rare these days, let's say kensho, which is a glimpse, one is ignorant of this emptiness and recognizes only the form. After enlightenment, they are seen as no different from each other. So, now, catching the ox. Today he encountered the ox, which had long been cavorting in the wild fields, and actually grasped it. For so long a time has it reveled in these surroundings that breaking it of its old habits is not easy. It continues to yearn for sweet-scented grasses. It is still stubborn and unbridled. If he would tame it completely, the man must use the whip. He must tightly grasp the rope and not let it go, for the ox still has unhealthy tendencies. Even while he tugs it by the nose, it might well turn its head toward old haunts. Now, here's the point of ongoing practice in a nutshell. Even with some degree of insight, some minor glimpse into the reality of, you might say, vast emptiness, nothing to be called holy, as Bodhidharma so sagely put it. We all have habit patterns, running this way, running that way, using our minds in limited ways, clinging to old identities we've long since outgrown, running towards the things that used to give us pleasure that may have faded in reality. Old habits continue, and so we continue with our zazen. We continue with teisho and doksan, breath practice and koan practice, helping to clear ourselves of, or the ox, of unhealthy tendencies that keep returning to old dualistic, self-centered haunts, those grasses that look so green, that tempted us so much, we'll still want to go back to them. Keep hold of the nose rope. By whip, please don't beat yourself. Only meaning here, stay with the practice. Stay with being completely present. Keep at it. It's not a one-time thing. This endless territory ahead. Endless path is the name of our Zendo, not taken lightly. Now, taming the ox. With the rising of one thought, another, and another are born. We all know this. Enlightenment brings the realization that such thoughts are not unreal, since even they arise from our true nature. It is only because delusion still remains that they are imagined to be unreal. This state of delusion does not originate in the objective world, but in our own minds. Now the verse. He must hold the nose rope tight and not allow the ox to roam, lest off to muddy haunts it should stray. Properly tended, it becomes clean and gentle. Untethered, it willingly follows its master. Now our practice starts to mature. The question of what is mu, being aware of this very breath, is with us all the time. We don't have to keep trying to remember it or grab it or hold on to it or cling to it. It becomes the very nature of who we are, how we embrace the world. The ox follows us willingly. We don't have to make any special efforts. We just have to keep going. 6, riding the ox home. One of the great images, if you remember the program that Rose and I put together for my transmission ceremony. In fact, if you go down to the water table, you'll see the original of that image. That was a gift to me from Roshi Kapleau one year when I was visiting with him down in his home in Florida. We had a little Zendo there. And he gave me that. And it's meant a great deal to me because the ox herding pictures meant a great deal to me. Somehow it came up and he just gave it to me. So riding the ox home. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have shown you some of these images. Let's see. So first glimpse of the ox. Maybe even we have to go back to number 2. Let's see. Yeah, finding the tracks. So looking all around. Looking all around. Where could it be? And then, first glimpse of the ox. Weirdly, there's something almost biblical there about my front parts you shall not see, but only my back. And there it is, the butt of the ox. Catch a little glimpse of it passing by us. And then, catching the ox. It's quite unruly, a first glimpse of that ox. It's wild, it's quite a beast. And then, taming the ox. Oh, very nice. Ox is following us without any force needed at all. Isn't that encouraging? And then riding the ox. How beautiful that image is. I want to read you the poem for that because it's lovely. Riding the ox home. Riding the ox home. The struggle is over. Gain and loss no longer affect him. He hums the rustic tune of the woodsman and plays the simple songs of the village children. Astride the ox's back, he gazes serenely at the clouds above. His head does not turn in the direction of temptations. Try, though one may, to upset him, he remains undisturbed. And in the verse, riding free as air, he buoyantly comes home through evening mists in wide straw hat and cape. Wherever he may go, he creates a fresh breeze, while in his heart profound tranquility prevails. This ox requires not a blade of grass. Now the notes for that. Let's see. So 4, the note is on, let's see, riding free as air, Roshi Kapleau writes rather, riding upside down, riding free as air. So all sense of logic, limitation by logic and reason, has been stepped beyond, which means the mind is not clouded, clouded is not the right word, the mind is not confused by concepts or identified in a limited way as its nature being conceptual. Riding free as air is a free translation of literally riding upside down. It is not logically trapped. And 5, let's see, the note for that is this ox requires not a blade of grass. That means, that is, the Buddha mind symbolized by the ox is entirely sufficient unto itself. It needs no external sustenance. This is really quite a profound statement when you think of how we all cling to so many externals for our identity. How hard it is to really deeply realize that our own birth, living, aging, and dying is entirely sufficient, entirely, I might say, the very meaning of life itself. How hard it is to really deeply see that, accept it. Now, 7, ox forgotten, self alone. In the Dharma, there is no two-ness. The ox is his primal nature. This she has now recognized. A trap is no longer needed when a rabbit has been caught. A net becomes useless when a fish has been snared, like gold, which has been separated from dross, like the moon, which is broken through the clouds. One ray of luminous light shines eternally. Now the verse. Only on the ox was she able to come home. But lo, the ox is now vanished, and alone and serene sits the man. The red sun rides high in the sky as he dreams on placidly. Yonder, beneath the thatched roof, his idle whip and idle rope are lying. Well, here is the image for that wonderful presentation, wonderful verse. Ox forgotten, self alone. And this is a wonderful moment in our practice to really reach this as a stage of living. It's inexpressibly lofty. This is lifetimes of work, but it can be touched. Ox forgotten, self alone. All efforts to gain it, all issues of practice, completely transcended in a moment. This can take, as I've said before, many people think, oh, I'll have enlightenment and then I'll be free. But even after an initial recognition by a teacher of the reality or the essential point you've touched base with in your practice, it could be 30 years of practice, ongoing practice after such a moment, before one touches base with something like this wonderful sense of the idle whip and idle rope, the red sun shining, ox forgotten, self alone. Many great Indian teachers, I think, touched this point. Now, both ox and self forgotten All delusive feelings have perished, and ideas of holiness, too, have vanished. He lingers not. This is an interesting, let me tell you the translation. He lingers not in, what it says is, he lingers not in Buddha, but Roshi Kapleau adds in brackets, he lingers not in the state of I am a Buddha. So he lingers not in Buddha. And he passes quickly on through not Buddha. Number of interpretations of not Buddha. But in the brackets that Roshi Kapleau adds, it reads like this, and he passes quickly on through the stage of, and now I have purged myself of the proud feeling, I am not Buddha. So this is very subtle territory, and anyone who practices on after some degree of realization will deal with this. I linger not in the state of, that's it. As the Shakyamuni said, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha. And then I pass quickly through the state of, I've even gotten beyond. I've let go of thinking that. I'm not attached to even the thought of Buddha. So I've passed through not Buddha. Endless refinement of our conceptualizing. Little tiny dusts that continue to arise. Very profound teacher put this together, as we can see. Then it says, even the 1,000 eyes can discern in him no specific quality. Now Roshi Kapleau writes, even the 1,000 eyes, and then brackets of 500 Buddhas and patriarchs. But I question that. I think it can also mean even the 1,000 eyes of the many-headed Bodhisattva of compassion, with his 1,000 helping hands and his 11 heads looking in all directions. I think there's an implication of that too. Can't find any specific quality in him at all. If hundreds of birds were now to strew flowers about his room, he could not but feel ashamed of himself. Let's look at the notes for that. So I'll start with number 6. 6. The implication of this passage is that Buddhas and patriarchs have a mirror-like wisdom, which can easily discern the character of the ordinary man, tainted as it is by various defilements. But one who has cleansed himself of all impurities, including the loftiest forms and most subtle forms, that is, of pride, would be so pure and natural that even a Buddha would be unable to look at him and say he is this or that. We're not becoming special. In fact, we're becoming more ordinary as we practice. I remember a line of Leonard Cohen's, an article he was interviewed about his relationship to Sasaki Roshi. They were very close, and he would say, Sasaki Roshi would always say to him, more ordinary, Kohn, more ordinary. Something like that. Now, about the birds strewing flowers, here's the note. This is an allusion to a parable centering around Ho Yu Zenji, a Zen master of the Tang dynasty. These are all Japanese names, but he was Chinese, remember, who lived on Mount Gozu, and who was widely extolled for the ardor with which he practiced Zazen in his mountain retreat. Even the birds, it is said, sang his praises by offering up flowers to him as he sat in his hut. After he became fully enlightened under the 4th patriarch, so the story goes, the birds ceased their floral offerings because, having attained perfect enlightenment, he no longer gave off any aura, even of devotion and virtue. Now, the verse. Whip, rope, and ox alike belong to emptiness. So vast and infinite the azure sky, that no concept of any sort can reach it. Over a blazing fire, a snowflake cannot survive. When this state of mind is realized, comes at last comprehension of the spirit of the ancient patriarchs. We might say the elders, men and women. So let's look at the notes for 8 and 9. There's the note. Azure sky stands for pure mind, vast, empty, without a cloud in the perfect azure sky. And 9, with perfect enlightenment, all delusive thoughts, including those of enlightenment or delusion, vanish. Over a blazing fire, a snowflake cannot survive. Finally, head to, let's see, so we've seen the ox forgotten and oxen self forgotten, the enso, or circle. This is where the ox herding pictures originally ended, in a shorter leap. Either 5 got to this, or 6 ended with the circle. Emptiness, complete wholeness. But Zen tradition by 12th century had gone past that, or 1200s rather, 13th century, had gone past that to 9, returning to the source. From the very beginning, listen to this, from the very beginning, there's not been so much as a speck of dust to mark the intrinsic purity. From the very beginning. He observes the waxing and waning of life in the world while abiding unassertively in a state of unshakable serenity. This waxing and waning is no phantom or illusion, but a manifestation of the source. Why then is there need to strive for anything? The waters are blue, the mountains are green. Alone with himself, he observes things endlessly changing. But please do not make this simple. This is a very, very realized condition. Deep, deep practice is being summarized. Lifetimes of practice is being summarized in this statement. And now the verse for this, wonderful. He has returned to the origin, come back to the source. But her steps have been taken in vain. It is though she were now blind and deaf. Seated in his hut, he hankers not for things outside. Streams meander on of themselves. Red flowers naturally bloom red. And we'll look at the notes for 10, 11, and 12 here. Let's see, 10. If, as the sutras say, our essential nature is bodhi, or perfection, why did all the Buddhas have to strive for enlightenment and perfection, asked Dogen, who was able to resolve this paradox only after years of strenuous effort culminating in his deep enlightenment. So here it says, why then is there need to strive for anything? That's a very good question. It tormented Dogen. Why? If we're all Buddhas from the very beginning, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue, did all the great sages of the past, men and women, have to sweat blood to realize this simple, ordinary truth? This is a very moving question. There is no simple answer. Only our own practice can open it to us. Why do we have to strive if there's nothing to strive for? If we already have everything we might ever gain? Now, let's see. It is as though he were now blind and deaf. The note says, what is implied here is that the fully enlightened man, being no longer caught up in the objects of the senses, absorbs himself so unself-consciously in what he sees and hears, that his seeing is no seeing, and his hearing no hearing. Whenever you see these terms, blind and deaf, in Zen, it can be very high praise. When Rinzai was dying, he passed on his Dharma When he gave it, he said, "Who could believe that my Dharma would pass on to this blind donkey?" Zen uses language in a very different way. To be a blind donkey. Donkey carries burdens without even thinking about it. A blind donkey can't even see where it's going. This is very high praise. Seated in his hut, he hankers not for things outside, and now the note for that. Since with enlightenment comes the realization that one embraces the universe and all things in it, what is there to hanker for? So let me show you. This is the returning to the source image on this page. It just is the branch right in front when we open our eyes. Blind and deaf. Just the branch right there. Now, the culmination, the most wonderful thing. 10. Entering the marketplace with helping hands. The gate of his cottage is closed, and even the wisest cannot find him. His mental panorama has finally disappeared. He goes his own way, making no attempt to follow the steps of earlier sages. Carrying a gourd, he strolls into the market. Leaning on his staff, he returns home. He leads innkeepers and fishmongers in the way of the Buddha. I'm going to read the verse too, and then we'll look at the notes. Bare-chested, barefooted, he comes into the marketplace. Muddied and dust-covered, how broadly he grins. Without recourse to mystic powers, withered trees he swiftly brings to bloom. So the notes, 14, 15, 16, and 17. 14. Let's see, there's a 13 too, the marketplace. Marketplace signifies the defiled world. That is everything we encounter every day. Everything we encounter when we turn on the television or the internet. Everything, except for trees, and rivers, and forests, and mountains, stars. 14, the sense, let's see, the sense is, even the wisest cannot find him. The sense of this is that he has now become so purified, so perfected, that the wisest sage can detect about him no marks of perfection. Nothing to make this person stand out, be visible in any particular way. And 15, his mental panorama, that is all concepts, opinions, assumptions, prejudices, are gone. It doesn't make him an idiot. What does it make him or her? And that entire mental panorama that we live within is gone. What might that be like? But don't try and get rid of your thoughts. That would just be creating the mental panorama of, now I'm free of my thoughts. Won't do. This is much, much more beautiful than that. Let's see, carrying a gourd. That's number 16. In ancient China, gourds were commonly used as wine bottles. What is implied here, therefore, is that the man, or woman, of the deepest spirituality is not adverse to drinking with those fond of liquor in order to help them overcome their delusions. It's not just to sit down and drink with others, but it's if that would be useful in helping someone. That's the point. Here we see a fundamental difference in emphasis between the role of the spiritually accomplished person in the Hinayana and in the Mahayana tradition. Zen, of course, is Mahayana. Maha means great, Yana means vehicle or way. In the Hinayana, the highest spiritual type, the celibate monk, is set apart from the laity. Ideally, he or nun, she, must be saint-like, a paragon of virtue, if he is to fulfill the role conceived for him by the community or her. Were it known that he indulged in alcohol, for instance, this would be regarded as the surest sign of lingering impurity, of proof that his spirituality was not yet wholly refined. In Mahayana Buddhism, on the contrary, the man of deep enlightenment or woman of deep enlightenment, who may be and often is the layman, gives off no smell of enlightenment, no aura of saintliness. If he did or she did, their spiritual attainment would be regarded as still deficient. Nor does he or she hold himself or herself aloof from the evils of the world. Doesn't mean such a person does any evil. When it's time to vote, such a person votes to keep evil from arising, perhaps. You don't go, oh, I'm too spiritual to be involved in having to vote. You do what you need to do in your life. He immerses himself in them, or she immerses himself in them, whenever necessary to emancipate men or women from their people, from their follies, but without being sullied by them himself. Blake says, to be in a, what is that? To be in a passion you good may do, but no passion if the, but no, or to be in a passion you good may do, but no good if the passion be in you. To be in a passion you good may do, but no good if the passion be in you. Same point. In this, such a person is like a lotus, the symbol in Buddhism of purity and perfection, which grows in mud, yet is undefiled by it. We all grow in mud. The situations of our life, their complexities, difficulties, confusion. This is the ground of our practice. Our culture, with all its darkness, confusion, selfishness, aspiration to somehow be of use and good. This is the mud of our life. It is the context of our practice. We're never escape from it. We work and grow because of it and through it and in it, doing the best we can. Finally, the last point, without recourse to mystic powers, withered trees he swiftly brings to bloom. This is another way of saying that the fully enlightened person, because their whole personality is suffused with an inner radiance, brings light and hope to those in darkness and despair. I have lots to say about the Oxherding pictures. This is just our introduction to them. I'd like to talk a bit about their history and their connection with our personal practice next teisho, and then I'll probably do a series of teishos on each of the points and their verses, reading from some variety of traditional sources. I find them some of the most inspiring spiritual literature, even, of anything. And so I look forward to sharing them further with you.